7 actors Orson Welles hated with a passion. Orson Welles was born George Orson Welles on May 6, 1915, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He's still one of the most mysterious and important people in the history of 20th century art and entertainment. His early life had both rich family moments and sad times. His father, Richard Head Wells, was a rich inventor and businessman, while his mother, Beatrice Ives Wells, was a great pianist who helped her son love the arts. But Wells's childhood wasn't at all perfect and happy. His parents split up when he was young. His mother died when he was only 9, and his father died just a few years later. By his mid-teens, Welles was basically an orphan. These sad things made him learn to take care of himself at a very young age and gave him a strong need to be independent and a want to control his own life. From his earliest years, Welles showed amazing talents in being creative and using his imagination. He was a kid genius in painting, drawing, and telling stories. His teachers saw his gift for acting, his powerful way of being around people, and his amazing ability to copy voice and become different characters. At the F&C Todd School for Boys in Woodstock, Illinois, Welles started trying out theater, directing big productions that showed hints of his later brilliance. The school's principal, Roger Hill, saw his talent and gave him chances to put on plays that were as good as professional shows. By the time he was a teenager, Welles had already become known as Somi Anuho was going to change the arts. Wells's career in front of people began with the theater and radio, ways that let him mix old classic traditions with new modern ideas. In 1930 seconds, he started the Mercury Theater with John Houseman in New York City. The Mercury Theater became a bold trying new things company that surprised audiences with fresh ways of doing Shakespeare and modern works. Their shows, like Wells's famous voodoo-style version of Macbeth set in Haiti, shocked and amazed critics. On radio, Welles became a name everyone knew, especially after his now legendary broadcast of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds on October 30th, 1938. The broadcast was done as a bunch of realistic news reports, and it caused huge panic among listeners who thought that Earth was really being attacked by Martians. This event made Wells's reputation as a daring, controversial, and brilliant storyteller. At just 25 years old, Orson Welles jumped into Hollywood with a contract that is still one of the most amazing in film history. Ricoh Pictures gave him complete creative control over his projects, an unheard-of move for a young and tested director. The result was Citizen Kane in 1941, a film that would change cinema itself. Welles directed, helped write, produced, and starred in the film, creating a groundbreaking just that used new techniques such as deep focus camera work, non-straight storytelling, overlapping talking, and bold camera angles. While Citizen Kane was not an immediate box office hit, critics saw its brilliance, and over time it came to be thought of as maybe the greatest film ever made. Its main character, Charles Foster Kane, loosely based on newspaper boss William Randolph Hearst, stood for ambition, power, and the emptiness that can hide beneath success, a theme that touched audiences for generations. Despite the artistic win of Citizen Kane, Wells's career in Hollywood was marked by fighting and frustration. Studios often saw him as too ambitious, too different, and too unwilling to give in. His next films, such as The Magnificent Ambersons, 1942, suffered from studio meddling, with large parts of his work cut or changed without his permission. Over the decades, Welles became known not just for his masterpieces, but also for the long list of projects he could not finish or that were taken from him. This constant battle with the Hollywood system gave him a reputation as a rebel genius who fought against money-making pressures. Yet Wells's creative energy never got weaker. He continued to direct, act, and write across many continents. In Europe, he found more freedom making films such as Othello 1951, Touch of Evil 1958, and Chimes at Midnight 1965. Each of these works showed his bold artistic vision, his love for Shakespeare, and his ability to turn small budgets into movie poetry. As an actor, Welles used his deep, rich voice and commanding presence in dozens of films, from The Third Man, 1949, in which his performance as the mysterious Harry Lime became iconic, to later roles in both mainstream and independent projects. Orson Welles got married for the first time on November 14, 1934, when at only 19 years old, he married Virginia Nicholson, a wannabe actress from Chicago. The marriage happened at a time when Welles was still at the beginning of his career, full of young ambition and creativity, but not yet the towering figure in cinema and theater that he would later become. Nicholson, who was herself interested in the arts and performing, was drawn to Welles' charm, his powerful brain, and his endless energy. The couple's marriage meant for Welles not only a personal promise, but also the start of a family during a time when his professional reputation was still being built in the world of theater and radio. 4 years later in 1938, the couple had their only child, a daughter named Christopher Wells Fetter, who would later go on to become an author and a respected expert in children's education. Christopher's early years were spent in circle of her father's growing fame, including the whirlwind success of his Mercury Theater on the air productions. And she grew up both inspired by and kept away from the huge shadow cast by his celebrity. Unfortunately, Welles' marriage to Virginia Nicholson began to fall apart as his personal and professional lives grew more and more complicated. By the late 1930s, Welles had started a secret affair with the glamorous Mexican actress Dolores Del Rio, who was already a major star in Hollywood and one of the first Latin American actresses to become internationally famous. Their romance was intense and passionate, but it also brought trouble into his first marriage. When Virginia learned of Welles's secret relationship with Dolores, the betrayal was too much to handle, and the couple's marriage officially ended in divorce in February 1940. This breakup came just as Welles was about to create his cinematic masterpiece, Citizen Kane, which would forever cement his reputation as one of the greatest directors in history. Welles's relationship with Dolores Del Rio, though filled with love and artistic matching, did not last forever. The affair went on for several years, but by 1943, it had come to an end. Around this time, Welles' romantic attention moved to another major star of the Hollywood Golden Age, the iconic Rita Hayworth. Hayworth, known as the Love Goddess for her stunning beauty and magnetic screen presence, captivated Welles in a way few others had. The relationship bloomed quickly, and by September 1943, the pair were married in what was considered one of the most glamorous unions in Hollywood. The marriage attracted enormous public and media attention, with Welles and Hayworth becoming one of the most talked about couples of the era. Their daughter, Rebecca Wells Manning, was born in December 1944, further mixing their personal lives at the height of their fame. Welles admired Rita deeply, often speaking of her with love and respect, but the pressures of Hollywood, their conflicting careers, and Welles's restless personality strained the marriage. Despite his genuine care for her, the union ultimately collapsed, and in 1947, the couple divorced. Rebecca, their daughter, would later pursue a quieter life away from the blinding lights of Hollywood and carve out her own path as a writer. After his second marriage ended, Welles continued to be involved in many relationships, both personal and professional, but it wasn't until 1955 that he entered into his third and final marriage. That year he married the Italian actress Paola Mori, who had gained attention for her elegancy and her talent in European cinema. Later that same year in November 1955, the couple welcomed their daughter Beatrice Wells, who would later become the guardian of her father's legacy and play an important role in protecting and managing his cinematic estate. Unlike his earlier marriages, Welles' relationships with Paola lasted for the rest of his life. They remained legally married from 1955 until his death in 1985. Spanning 3 decades of both victories and challenges, however, Orson Welles' personal life was always filled with complexity. In 1966, he began a long-term partnership with Oja Koder, a Croatian-born actress and artist who became not only his romantic companion, but also his creative ekolobotra. Oja inspired and worked closely with Welles on many of his later unfinished film projects, including The Other Side of the Wind. Their partnership was deep and enduring, lasting nearly 2 decades. And although Welles never divorced Paola, it was Oja Koder with whom he shared much of his final years. This unusual arrangement showed Welles's often different approach to life, art, and love. Orson Welles was known not only for his genius as a filmmaker and actor, but also for his sharp tongue and stubborn opinions. Few men in Hollywood were as outspoken as Welles, who refused to hide his dislike for those he felt were overrated, unprofessional, or simply unbearable to work with. While he was capable of huge charm and wit, he also carried with him a simmering anger toward certain actors whom he considered fakes or annoying people in the world of cinema. Here are 7 actors Orson Welles famously or infamously hated with a passion along with the harsh words he left behind. 1. Charlton Heston. Welles worked with Charlton Heston on Touch of Evil 1958, a project that remains one of his masterpieces. Yet, despite the critical praise the film later received, Welles had little fondness for Heston, whom he saw as stiff and limited in range. Welles since said Heston was a block of wood with muscles. The studio thought he was a star, but he was only a statue. Their working together was filled with tension as Heston tried to assert his influence in areas where Welles believed he had no business interfering. To Welles, Heston represented the kind of wooden Hollywoodster system he despised. 2. Humphrey Bogart. Though Bogart was celebrated as one of Hollywood's toughest leading men, Welles could not stand him. Welles thought Bogart's acting style was forced and theatrical rather than real. He once remarked, Bogart was always playing at being tough, but never convincing. You could see the sweat in the performance. Welles had little patience for actors who built a carefully crafted image rather than jiving themselves to the truth of a role. To him, Bogart was the example of a Hollywood creation rather than a real actor. 3. Joseph Cotten. This may surprise many as Cotten was one of Welles's closest friends and collaborators during the Mercury theater years. However, their relationship went bad later in life. Welles grew bitter over what he saw as Cotten's betrayal. 1. Cotten pursued his own career in Hollywood rather than staying loyal to Welles's projects. Joe was a dear friend, but he abandoned me when the studios came calling. Loyalty meant little to him when fame was at stake. Though the two made up somewhat before Welles's death, there remained a lingering bitterness in Welles's words about Cotten's choices. 4. Laurence Olivier. Welles respected Olivier's technical brilliance, but disliked his ego and what he saw as Olivier's obsession with perfection at the expense of truth. Olivier was all technique, no soul. He could play kings, but he could never play men. To Welles, acting was about raw humanity, about stripping oneself bare. While Olivier's mannered style struck him as fake, the 2 men were rivals in the world of Shakespearean performance, and Welles never forgave Olivier for being hailed as the supreme interpreter of the bard. 5. John Houseman. Although not primarily known as an actor, Houseman worked closely with Welles in the early Mercury Theater days. Their partnership in bitterness, and Welles carried that anger for decades. When Houseman later appeared in films such as Paper Chase, Welles sneered at the idea of him being taken seriously as a performer. Houseman was a bureaucrat pretending to be an artist. He was always better at paperwork than performance. Their feud became legendary, and Welles made sure that his dislike for Houseman was widely known. 6. Richard Burton. Burton's larger-than-life persona and Shakespearean career might have made him a kindred spirit to Welles, but instead the two clashed in temperament and philosophy. Welles dismissed Burton's performances as self-indulgent and ruined by his notorious drinking. Burton bellowed his lines and thought volume was emotion. He mistook excess for greatness. Welles, who himself loved grand theatrical gestures, nevertheless felt Burton lacked discipline and truth, reducing Shakespeare to melodrama. 7. Joan Fontaine. Welles also carried a grudge against Joan Fontaine, whom he worked with on Jane Eyre 1943. He found her to be cold, difficult, and dismissive of his direction. Fontaine was an iceberg that never melted. Acting with her was like reciting lines to a marble statue. Their tension on set was obvious, and Welles never forgave what saw as her lack of generosity as a performer. He believed that she drained the life from scenes and resented her Hollywood diva attitude. Orson Welles' opinions were often harsh, but they were also deeply revealing of his own artistic philosophy. He valued truth, risk, and raw humanity in acting, and had no patience for vanity, fakeness, or disloyalty. While some of his criticisms might seem unfair, they demonstrate the fiery spirit of a man who lived for his art and refused to compromise. For Welles, to hate passionately was just another way of showing how much he cared about the craft of cinema. Welles died on October 10, 1985, after suffering from a heart attack. The previous day, he had recorded his final interview on the syndicated TV program, The Merv Griffin Show. On returning home, he worked into the early hours, typing stage directions for a shoot, which was scheduled for the following day. Early in the morning, he was found dead by his chauffeur. In accordance with his will, his mortal remains were cremated and a brief private funeral was held.